Good evening, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you to the Council Executive meeting. Whether you're a participant, whether you've registered to speak, you're watching live, or you're watching after the event, you're all very welcome to the meeting. We've got a long agenda covering a variety of different items and a lot of public speakers joining us today, which is absolutely great. So I'll start as soon as I can. The first agenda item is declarations of interest. Could I ask colleagues who will show to me virtually or physically that they want to speak if they've got any declarations of interest? Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst it is on the Council register, I just want to record for item 9 that I am a school governor at Westfield.
Thank you very much for that. That I know will be recorded in the minutes. I haven't got anybody else indicating, so thank you for that. And we'll then move on to agenda item 2, which is the exclusion of press and public. And you'll see in your agenda packs that confidential annexes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 to agenda item 9 on the asset management strategy are on the grounds that they contain information relating to the financial or business affairs of particular persons, and therefore if we were to discuss or raise questions that related to those annexes, we would at that stage have to exclude the press and public. But I know in all previous meetings, we've always done everything we can do to make sure that we retain in public session throughout. But I'd just like executive now to indicate that if we were to stray into those confidential access, that we will go into the press and the public. Although, as I said, I know we'll attempt to avoid that. If I could see those in favour of that, please. Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of that, should we need to do it at the time. That then takes us to agenda item 3, which is the minutes of the previous meeting that we held on the 22nd of October. And these are included in pages 1 to 10 in your executive packs. So I will give colleagues a few seconds an opportunity if they want to raise any issues with the minutes. If not, if I could see all those in favour of accepting those minutes, please. Thank you very much. So again, a clear majority in favour of accepting the minutes. We now move to agenda item 4, public participation. We've got 10 registered public participants who are going to be speaking to us today. So thank you to all of those for taking part. I just wanted to add that following the council's constitution, like at full council, we will have half an hour for public speakers, which is why we have the 10 public speakers today. There were some other public speakers that tried to register after that half an hour deadline. And so what I've made sure is that any of them had an opportunity to send any written comments in, and I know that those written comments that have been received have been circulated to all executive members. So thank you to those members of the public that sent in their written comments that I know executive members will have read and taken into account, and this will be acknowledged in the minutes of the meeting. But without further ado, our first public speaker is Anelka Houston, who's here to talk about the future of the extended city centre Footstreets and to present the views of the York Disability Rights Forum. Public speakers have 3 minutes to talk to us, but thank you in advance, Anelka, for getting in touch in advance. And so please, I know I've agreed a little bit of flexibility for you, so don't worry about that. And over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, I'm Elkie, and I'm here to read a statement from York Disability Rights Forum. We've been involved in the consultation process and are grateful that the team carrying out the consultation have worked closely with us. We believe the results are a good representation of the views of those we know to have been involved. We'd like to acknowledge that you have carried out this consultation, even though it was after the changes were implemented. That being said, your own findings evidence clear discrimination against disabled people. In light of this, to continue with the measures would be in clear violation of the Equality Act 2010. As today's decision is not being made using COVID-19 emergency powers, you have an undoubted legal responsibility to provide objective justification for any discrimination you cause and consider to be indirect discrimination. This is required for both the continuation of the traffic regulation order, which removes the parking exemption for blue badge holders, and the restriction of disabled vehicle access to the Footstreets. Furthermore, to rely on the objective justification defence, you must show that the continuation of these measures is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. You must demonstrate what that aim is and show that the consequences of this decision don't have a disproportionate effect on people with a legally protected characteristic, or that you have provided suitable mitigations to remove the effect. Based on the irrefutable evidence that you've collected, you can no longer claim to be unaware of the significant negative impact of the Street extensions on disabled people. It is clear from your findings that mitigations proposed by the Council to the Executive do not reduce this impact and cannot be considered adequate reasonable adjustments. The Council has a duty to mitigate the significant disadvantages imposed upon disabled people. Therefore, if you continue these discriminatory closures without an array of suitable mitigations in place, you are opening yourself up for legal action. Whatever decision is made, please note that we will be continuing to monitor the Council and keep you accountable for disabled people who live, work, shop, eat out, and pay taxes in York. We strongly urge you to read and consider what you've written in York's equality strategy, and I'd like to finish by reading from it a direct quote. Everyone should have an equal opportunity to make the most of their lives and talents. This means removing societal barriers in the city so that everyone can be involved and feels welcome. For example, ensuring community spaces and workplaces are accessible for people who use a wheelchair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, which are appreciated, and I know will be taken into account when we get to that agenda item later today. Thank you very much. What I'd like to say to all the public speakers is once you've had an opportunity to speak and you leave the call, please do keep watching on the live stream for when we get to that agenda item. Our second public speaker today is Bernadette Cullen, who has registered on the same agenda item to ask about bicycle access through the city centre. And Bernadette, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Hello, members, and thank you for allowing me to speak at your meeting. I have 3 points that I'd like to put to you, which follow on quite nicely, really, from the points made by the previous speaker. So, I have recently started a job in the city centre. I used to run the bike rescue project in York for 10 years, and I've now started a job with Aspire iGen in the city centre as the employment engagement officer for Aspire to Lead, which is addressing gender pay inequality. The issue I have is that I can only now walk the length of Collier Gate on a good day because of severe arthritis in my hip. I am, however, fortunately, still able to cycle, but I cannot use my bike in the city centre. So I would like you to tell me how I am supposed to access my work. I cannot go into the city centre to work unless I can access it on a bicycle. The second point I'd like to make and ask you to consider is how your current stance on allowing disability mobility scooters but not disabled cyclists into the city centre meets with reasonable adjustments for access under the Equality Act of 2010. And also I would say, I would second what the previous speaker said about blue badge holders. It's very difficult for me to find somewhere near enough to park at work so that I can walk to work. My third point that I would like to make and ask you to consider is, how do you account for the lack of permeability of the city centre to cyclists when it was a requirement of the £3.7 million given to the council by Cycling England in 2009, and it has still not yet been implemented? Thank you. That's all I'd like to say.
Thank you very much for your comments that will get taken into account when we discuss that relevant agenda item. That's appreciated. Our third registered speaker today is Alison Hume, registered on the same agenda item to represent the views of the 500 York citizens who have signed a petition asking for the Footstreets to be reopened. And Alison, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my name is Alison Hume, and as you just said, as a parent of a disabled young adult, I started a petition to ask for the reopening of the recently closed Footstreets until a full equality impact assessment and consultation were undertaken. And yeah, nearly 1,100 people signed it, half of them living in York, and many leaving moving testimony in the comments as to how the closures had drastically impacted their lives. The report from your officers states that a consultation will need to begin in February on making the temporary closure of these Footstreets permanent next September. That is legally required, and on this we're all agreed. So until that process is concluded, I'm calling on you as an executive to take the only sensible measure you can, given the mistakes that were somewhat understandably made in a hurry in the summer. Please allow drivers with blue badges to park on the recently closed Footstreets, including the whole of Goodramgate. This will provide a sensible temporary solution while you work on permanent ones. The city centre simply does not have enough dedicated disabled parking bays which are close enough to where people need to get to. This is a fact. It has to be resolved, and in the meantime, the limited raising of barriers at the recently closed Footstreets will fulfil your public duty to people with a legally protected characteristic. You need to act to restore trust, because this is how your current failed set of mitigating measures made my friend Leanne feel. She said, "I use a wheelchair and my adult daughter uses a specialist seating system. We are a family of 5. Our car is a safe space where we can deal with any anxiety, as well as somewhere to store all the equipment our daughter needs, somewhere to return to if needed. Now we can't park in Goodramgate. I feel like my family has been banned from the centre. It was already hard enough to get into York as a disabled family. Now it is impossible." Please listen to Leanne and many like her. Please don't compound the mistakes you have made by tinkering around the edges. As an executive, please ask for this report to be properly scrutinised. Get it right and move York closer to being a human rights city instead of a discriminatory no-go zone for many. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that and your comments that will be taken into account when we discuss that agenda item. Our fifth public speaker today is John Pybus. He's here to talk about the same agenda item to support the long-term pedestrianisation of Fossgate. And John, you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Hello there, good evening. I'm John Pybus. I'm a landlord of the Bluebell on Fossgate and a committee member of the Fossgate Traders Association. The pedestrian of Fossgate has been an ongoing concern for this council my entire life. That is 35 years that committee after committee has promised to help businesses on the street. 2 years ago, the planning committee invested £1.1 million in Fossgate and pavement with the view to pedestrianise the street. The traffic flow has been reversed, pavements widened, parking and loading bays installed, and the street was resurfaced. This improvement to the street was championed by the Fossgate Traders Association and received with thanks. The final step of the process was to pedestrianise the street. During the summer, every hospitality business has greatly benefited from having outside seating. Indeed, the Bluebell would not have survived the summer without it. But aside from pedestrianisation being a business saver during the coronavirus epidemic, it has greatly improved the street. It is safer for pedestrians to use, it looks more attractive, the air is noticeably cleaner, it's quieter, and there has not been any increase in antisocial behaviour. Being a business owner and a resident of Fossgate, the quality of my life has improved dramatically now that Fossgate is not being used as a rat run. To read that a drop in turnover in some businesses has been attributed to the street closure beggars belief, when every business has seen a decline in sales this year for rather obvious reasons. It is with immense disappointment that I learnt that the street is to return to being full of traffic. One of the reasons for this, and I use this word extremely loosely, is a survey conducted by one of the owners of only one retail premises. This survey has been presented to the council as a matter of fact, and the representations of all the residents of Fossgate, despite this not being the case. However, as spurious as that survey was, I'm not here to argue the other side of the debate. It is apparent that this committee would like to please everyone, and for that you have my genuine thanks. First, closing the street due to requests from businesses, and then deciding to reopening it after complaints from some residents and some retailers. I would ask this committee to review the operation of Fossgate as a foot street by conducting their own survey again of businesses and residents just on Fossgate. I do believe that you can help businesses and residents with intelligent compromise that will be agreeable to everyone. It must be noted that businesses on Fossgate contribute a significant amount to the economy of York. And with a closed street and outside seating, business rates of these premises will only increase, further supporting the council financially. I understand how frustrating your position is. For example, blue badge holders parking on the pavement outside the Bluebell prohibit wheelchair users from accessing the street and the pub. There are no easy choices here for you to make. However, your own council policies declare a strong desire to move towards a car-free city centre. This will be beneficial to the health of residents and a huge benefit to hospitality and retail businesses on the street. This can be achieved whilst placating residents, disability groups, cyclists, retail outlets and hospitality businesses alike. And I urge you to find a compromise that everyone on Fossgate can get behind. Picking one side over the other in this disagreement will not resolve the issue. Please lead on this issue with clarity, compromise and factual representations of opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that will be considered when we get to that agenda item later today. Our sixth public speaker is Natasha Rawnsley on the same agenda item to talk about better disabled access and increased hours of access. And Natasha, you have up to 3 minutes.
Hi. Yes, before the disabled parking ban in York, I used to go to the city centre when I needed. I have MS and great difficulty walking, and I rely on a walking frame for short distances and a pushed wheelchair for longer. When I would either drive to Goodrum Gate or Blake Street and park as close as possible to the shops I needed to visit, and without assistance use the walker to get to the shop. Also, you know, I have MS, and that means that sometimes I might lose control of my bladder, things like that. You know, if I needed to get back to my car to return home, could do that quite easily if it was just there. After the ban, I'm now having to drive to the Monkgate car park, get out of the car, into the wheelchair, and the walker's not an option. I'd be pushed to the taxi where I'd get out of the wheelchair, into the taxi, and then be driven to St Andrew Gate or the end of Parliament Street. And I would then have to get out of the taxi, back into the wheelchair to then go and get pushed to the shops that I needed to go to. I mean, I used to have independence and stuff, and now and I could go out and I'd do it myself. Now I have no independence. I cannot do that anymore. And Fossgate, yes, you can get busy and stuff, but all the yellow strikes up the curb means that a disabled badge holder cannot park there. My hairdresser's is Femme Fatale on Fossgate. You know, I can't get to that place anymore. I can't go to pubs or coffee shops on Fossgate because of this ban. And yeah, I'd just like access back to the city. I mean, and getting down Blake Street and things, you know, I could do that before and park up and be able to walk onto Coney Street and things like that. 7, 8 o'clock at night is just far too late. I can't go into town to do anything at that time. So, I mean, please open the Footstreets.
Thank you very much for your comments that will get taken into account when we get onto the relevant agenda item. Our 7th public speaker on the item is Councillor Fiona Fitzpatrick as the ward councillor on agenda item 7, future of the extended city centre Footstreets. Councillor Fitzpatrick, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me.
I can, yes, we can.
Good. Okay, thank you. I'm speaking tonight as a Guildhall ward councillor. But to set that in context, I want to say that I've lived in the city centre for the last 15 years. Fossgate is my patch. I live just through Straker's Passage and I walk up there every day. The Bluebell, the restaurants, the shops, are all places I'm very familiar with. I know all the people that own these places and I speak to them regularly. And I've even volunteered in St Leonard's Hospice shop and I man a stall for the street festival. Well, obviously we haven't had one this year, but previous years. So these people are friends and neighbours. Equally, other parts of the city centre, like the Shambles Market, I know the traders there very well. I listen to what they have to say. I want to try and help if I can, as I did with the problem last year about hours that they could exit the market. So much so am I a friend of the market that I've been nominated for a national award from Make It York and the traders as a friend of the market. So it was then very surprising to get an urgent call from a trader in Franklin's Yard one morning last summer. Can you come and sort out what's going on with the barriers that are blocking us from entering and exiting our businesses and homes? I had no more idea about what was happening than they had because nobody had consulted or informed me. After much discussion with them and the executive member, I insisted that we had a meeting. So we had a meeting of officers, ward councillors and exec members, which should have taken place prior to any of this. By the way, I have to say at this stage, officers were very apologetic, extremely helpful, and had just assumed that ward councillors had been consulted. An uneasy truce was maintained and still is maintained on Fossgate. But as you've heard from previous speakers, it is an uneasy truce. And it's my job as a ward councillor to try and manage this. So moving forward, I want to make it quite clear I support the principles behind Footstreets and the permanent pedestrianisation in certain areas. I definitely want to see less cars in the city centre, having given up my own car 3 years ago to actually practice what I preach. However, I want much better consultation moving forward on Footstreets. I think there are key 3 stakeholder groups that we need to consult. We should have consulted on Fossgate. Thankfully, it's happened in a much better way on Castlegate. But the 3 stakeholder groups that I identify and that I try and talk to are the hospitality traders, the retail traders and the residents. And they're 3 quite distinct groups. They have different needs, which is why we've heard about the difficulties on Fossgate. They all have come to me. I speak to all of them. I have to represent all of them. So I want the executive member going forward to make sure that the ward councillors are consulted. And when I say ward councillors, I want to make it absolutely clear that there are 3 ward councillors in Guildhall, not just 1. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fitzpatrick, and your comments will get taken into account when we consider the relevant agenda item later. I just wanted to check at this stage, Jane Burton, who was our 4th public speaker, have I missed Jane in our public speaking running order? Janie, I don't know if you've been keeping track.
Hello, yes.
Yeah, hello, Jane.
Yes, hello.
My apologies. That was my fault. So you're out. You're out of the right order. But Jane Burton has registered to speak on the future of the extended city centre Footstreets regarding the impact on the disabled community and blue badge holders. And Jane, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. I would like to speak against the proposed continuation of the Foot Street closure to blue badge holders. I'm a resident of York and born and brought up here, live very close to the city centre. I'm disabled. I'm astonished that as disabled people celebrate 25 years since the Disability Discrimination Act was introduced into law, that such a large number of disabled residents and visitors in York are now excluded by barriers from the city centre, taking away the former parking on double yellows in Goodrem Gate, King Square, Collier Gate, Lendal and Blake Street, and then not providing anything like the number of spaces lost, and more importantly, the proximity to city centre streets and shops are too far away, has meant that myself and hundreds of other disabled people in York are now excluded from entering the city centre. It is deeply distressing and disabling for us. It has brought with it a loss of dignity, independence and major frustration. The mitigation City of York Council have provided show a deep lack of understanding of the needs of disabled citizens and visitors. Not every disabled person has the same needs. The taxi service is too far away, and during COVID is wholly unsuitable for many disabled people. The new blue badge parking spaces in Xavier Gate are simply too far away for those like myself with limited mobility to access shops and services. Shop mobility is also not a suitable mitigation for many. Suggesting we shop online whilst others are able to carry on using the shops is discriminatory, and these measures are a breach of the Equality Act. It reflects very badly on York City Council, not only to disabled residents, but also to tourists. We as a group still have rights to spend our money in person and to not be excluded from the town centre. Cars are very often the legs of disabled people and also provide a place for respite for some to attend their medical needs, amongst other issues. When we are encouraged to shop local, it is really an outrage that shops and services we've been accessing for years are now closed to us. The priority now is for realistic mitigations to be introduced. The barriers should be lifted for blue badge holders to access the streets such as Goodrem Gate and Blake Street. When the automatic barriers are installed, blue badge holders should be provided with fobs in order to access the streets and shops and services. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your comments, which are appreciated, and we'll take them into account when we consider agenda item 7. Our 8th public speaker is David Finch, who's here to talk about agenda item 9, update on the asset management strategy, as chair of the Friends of Lehman Park. And David, you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. So yeah, as you say, I wanted to comment on item 9, the asset strategy, and in particular Annex 2 and lines 32-33, which consider the Riverside Path going between Scarborough Railway Bridge and Jubilee Terrace. So to put me into context, I lead a group called Friends of Lehman Park, who are a group of engaged and proud residents who have maintained and made many improvements to our neighbourhood over the years. And our neighbourhood is sometimes affectionately called the island. And the reason being is that historically, our neighbourhood was very much cut off from the rest of the city when you used to have to take a ferry across the Ouse to reach our neighbourhood. And between the river and the railway, our neighbourhood felt like an island. And largely, a lot of our residents in our area live in terraced accommodation, and being close to the town and station means that we've got a lot of pedestrians and cyclists amongst our residents. So the route leading through to the city from our neighbourhood is really important to us. And the rerouting of Lehman Road could make our neighbourhood feel very much like an island again for pedestrians and cyclists. The Riverside route is our primary route into town. Lehman Road is considered a backup, a secondary circuitous route. And the York Central proposals would make the Lehman Road route much more circuitous. So the Riverside route is going to become more important than ever. But there's issues with this route of lighting, security, flooding, and the width of the path itself. And these issues make the route unsafe or unviable to some people. and they could be mitigated with some really relatively simple improvements, which would be really essential to our community if Lehman Road is to be rerouted. And as I understand it, it's the land ownership issues which could prevent the essential Section 106 improvements that we really need to this route. So it's essentially the timing issue here that such improvements really must happen before the York Central development begins. So that's why I've come here to speak today, is really in support of this item in the agenda. Very happy to see this agenda item, and that's why I urge our elected representatives to see this through and make sure we secure this piece of land for the long-term future, because this is really of significant, real high significance to the island neighbourhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments that will get taken into account when we discuss agenda item 9. Our ninth public speaker today is Councillor Callum Taylor. He's registered to speak on agenda item 9, update on the asset management strategy about the Riverside Pathway Plan. Councillor Taylor, you have 3 minutes.
Chair, can you hear me?
I can.
Hello?
Yes. You've just come through.
Thank you. Cheers. And good evening, executives. I wouldn't be surprised if not all of you believe me when I say this, but as an opposition councillor, whilst I'm not backwards in coming forwards with challenge, I genuinely am happy to give due encouragement to the administration when it's merited. For well over 2 years now, Holgate councillors have made representations to CYC and the York Central Partnership on the need to improve the Riverside route between Jubilee Terrace and Scarborough Bridge. A range of quite modest changes will give a net result of a significantly improved route that will benefit thousands of residents. So it's great to see the council finally moving on this and sharing in public that it too wants these improvements here. All I'd add at this stage is the paper doesn't include a couple of points we have raised previously, namely CCTV along the route and repairing the broken wall that runs along the railway border, which is often a dumping ground for things that probably shouldn't be there. Next, if the land can't be purchased and we end up with another leasehold, then to avoid the previous inertia on the matter, we need to make sure that the terms of that leasehold take into account the need for improvements to take place. And obviously, lastly, if you get your way with closing Lehman Road, then this will leave this route as the only remaining direct route to the island area and the only remaining one that's got uninterrupted 24-hour access. So this makes improving the route not just a good thing to do, but an essential thing to do. Please keep going here. Provided there's the urgency and follow through that we need, you'll have the support of ward councillors and the community here. On another matter within this paper, I'd urge you to press pause on the Oakhaven part of the strategy. Some change in tack now, otherwise you'll open a can of worms, Chair. The health scrutiny minutes from both December and February cover commitments from the council in response to the committee wanting to see and input on the council's plans for Oakhaven. A commitment from the council to take those options to health scrutiny before you guys on executive decide on its future. Now, this hasn't happened, probably due to the upheaval of the pandemic rather than any sly moves behind the scenes. But either way, it needs putting right. Despite registering on time and despite CYC not advertising that this is a first come, first served thing, or that it's limited to 30 minutes, or the fact that she's a ward councillor speaking on the sale of a key asset in our ward, Councillor Rachel Melly has been told that she can't speak tonight. I know that she's since sent you a detailed note, Chair, to you all in writing, given that another speaker's been allowed an extra little bit of time tonight, and given that the long list of speakers are all on one specific item, it makes the exec look like a bad faith actor, and particularly you as chair in how you've not used reasonable discretion to let Councillor Melly speak on this. I hope you can prove us wrong, because the only fair thing that the executive can do now at this stage is pause on the Oakhaven element of the paper and let the due process that was publicly agreed to take the options to health scrutiny first before it comes to you guys for a final decision. I accept what's done is done. Errors may have been made. It's probably an innocent mix-up, but it still needs to go to health scrutiny first. If you don't do this, then it begs the question, what's the point of having scrutiny committees? And what's the point of taking minutes and making decisions? We can't just pick and choose. So come on, please follow what was agreed. And thanks for hearing me out, really. I hope you all have a nice weekend. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Your comments on agenda item 9 will get taken into account when we get onto that relevant agenda item. And I hope you have a nice weekend too. And then our 10th public speaker today is James Mason, and he's registered to speak on agenda item 10, CWSC's relationship with Welcome to Yorkshire as the Chief Executive of Welcome to Yorkshire. So welcome, James, and you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I'll try not to take the full 3 minutes up, but it's just a pleasure to speak to you all tonight, despite the new tiering system that has been. As the Chief Executive of Welcome to Yorkshire, speaking with regards to 4 parts of the county under different tiering systems, you know, the visitor economy is under threat, probably greater than it ever has been to some extent. But what we have tried to achieve over the last 6 to 9 months is to be the voice of tourism within the region on behalf of all local authorities and national parks in Yorkshire. I think we've done that to a certain degree of success in terms of making tourism and the tourism industry and the visitor economy relevant as a big employer, as a big economic driver for the region, and also in terms of the hinterland and the supply chains of tourism. So it isn't just the bed and breakfast and hoteliers and visitor attractions that are affected here, it's the supply chain, such as the food and drink producers, the public artists that would adorn York's city streets during the summer and winter months, the retailers, the suppliers to the Christmas markets, of course, that we've had to recently cancel. I joined Welcome to Yorkshire back in January. It's fair to say it's had a difficult couple of years. My remit was to try and rebuild the brand, try and restore relationships and demonstrate real value for the taxpayer in supporting Welcome to Yorkshire going forward. Our role is to promote Yorkshire as a place to visit, and we've added the streams of live, work and study to that over the last few months. If we can attract students to come and study in Yorkshire, in particular York and York St John University, if we can attract people to then stay and live and work in the city and then in the county, we have an ability to drive economic impact through our pubs, bars, restaurants, high street retailers, shops, visitor attractions. And it's really important that Welcome to Yorkshire acts as that conduit between both the public and private sector to demonstrate that Yorkshire, alongside the likes of Cumbria and Cornwall and Scotland and Wales, is a world-class destination that can attract people to the UK and actually is a place that they want to stop and spend time and spend money. The Tour de Yorkshire, which is our cycling event, has been postponed this year and will be moved into next year. And actually what we've seen there is the whole events calendar decimated over the last couple of months. And that's our principal income generator. So we've moved to be dexterous, we've pivoted, we've looked at other income streams, we've launched a personal membership whereby the diaspora of Yorkshire all across the world can buy into what we're trying to do in terms of sustainability. You can buy a tree and we can plant a tree for you so that you can put your roots down in Yorkshire. And our big campaign for 2021 is Walkshire, where we demonstrate that Yorkshire could be the walking capital of the world for us all to enjoy. That's walking around the walled city of York, but that's also walking along the Yorkshire coast or walking to work. It's got significant mental and health benefits. And of course, in a world where we're all working from home, we believe that Walkshire can be a campaign that everyone can get involved in going forward. I think that's my 3 minutes. I won't take any more of your time up, but I do appreciate the time. We're working very hard. We're demonstrating value for the people of York City and for the rest of the county to make Yorkshire something to be really proud of going into 2021.
Thank you very much for that. And your comments will get taken into account when we consider that agenda item later today. I'd like to thank all of our public speakers for joining us. Hopefully they'll all now dial out of this meeting, but keep watching on the live stream with others at home. Just at this stage, Janie, just wanted you to confirm for me the process for public speakers that I just outlined at the start. in that following the council rules in the constitution, and that we always follow at full council, there's a 30-minute limit, and therefore after the first 10 registered speakers we maintain a list, and on this occasion I offered the opportunity to circulate written comments. But if, for example, a ward councillor was 16th or 17th on that list, if I decided to exercise discretion, the only discretion I would have, in my opinion, would be to have everybody speaking, and therefore not following the rules that we normally follow, rather than picking and choosing. So it's not a decision in that sense that I've made, but just grateful given it was referenced. If you could confirm that.
Yes, that is a correct summary of the position, Chair. We do publish that the public participation rule is for a 30-minute period. That means we can accept the first 10 speakers who are registered to speak, and thereafter we keep effectively a waiting list. Everybody who is registered to speak from number 11 onwards was asked to put written submissions forward, and we have guaranteed to share those with yourself and your colleagues this evening. In respect of the rules of natural justice, if a ward councillor is, say, number 17 on the list, you would be required to consider the public participation of all of those that were on the list prior to that, so that there is fairness and equality throughout the whole process. So yes, your summary is correct, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. And once again, thank you to our public speakers. Also, I'd just like to mention at this stage that at 7:30, we will take a 10-minute break because of the importance of the number of agenda items that we have, in the event that we're in the middle of the agenda items when we get to that time. But if I abruptly stop us, then I just wanted to explain why. It's not because we've got to a particular point or I'm trying to stop somebody speaking. It's just because we're having a 10-minute break at that stage. So that then takes us on to agenda item 5, which is the forward plan that's included between pages 11 and 14. An opportunity for councillors to raise any issues on this. If not, if I could see those in favour of accepting the forward plan, please. Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting agenda item 5. We then move to agenda item 6, which is the recovery and renewal strategy and our November update, which is included on pages 15 to 24. Before we discuss this report in any detail, I'd just like to say a few words, and then I've also asked Sharon Schultz, who's joined us as our Director of Public Health, to make a few comments, particularly obviously as today saw the confirmation that we would be in tier 2, and then we'll go on to discuss the report. I think it is important to reflect on that announcement made today, and also next week's transition from the national lockdown. I'd like to firstly begin by thanking everyone in the city, residents and businesses, for their incredible efforts in driving the virus down across York. Today, York's infection rate remains the lowest in the Yorkshire and Humber region and well below the national average. However, despite York bucking these trends, it has been confirmed, as you know, by the government that will be placed in tier 2 restrictions from next week. Whilst this is disappointing, that means that from the 2nd of December, residents, businesses and communities must continue their efforts to stop the spread of the virus by following social distancing guidance, working from home as much as possible, and following the national guidance. We know that this has been an exceptionally difficult year for many, but despite York's excellent work, the virus is still present in our city. With the national lockdown restrictions lifted, residents will be able once again to visit York's fantastic array of local shops, and with Christmas in mind, I would strongly encourage all residents to shop local and support our business community through this difficult period. With the government's 3-tier lockdown system back in place, we are lobbying for York to be moved into tier 1 restrictions and continuing to make the case for York, and urge that the government provide significantly more financial support for the many residents and businesses in the city that need it. As outlined in the OBR forecasts that were published yesterday, the economic impact of the pandemic cannot be underestimated, and the government must recognise that considerably more funding is required to support those households on low incomes and to ensure that businesses don't go under. turning our attention to the latest report, you can see from the report that there remains a huge amount of activity to support the city's recovery from the pandemic. And we'll come on to that a little bit later after we've heard from Sharon. So at this stage, if I could hand over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it is fair to say that we're all disappointed that York isn't in tier 1, but just to put that in context, really, if you look at the government's published list of all local authorities today, there are only 2 areas that have been put into tier 1. That's Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly and the Isle of Wight. The rest of the country are in tier 2 or tier 3. And in fact, when we look at the Yorkshire and Humber region, only York and North Yorkshire have been put into tier 2, and the rest of the region are in tier 3. So even though it is disappointing, I would just like to say that people in York, all of us working together, we've done a fantastic job in getting our case numbers down, and everyone is to be congratulated for that. I thought it might be helpful to give you some indication of how the government made the decision which tier to put local authorities in. So this was based on 5 key indicators. The first of those really is looking at the number of COVID cases in age groups. So breaking down the population into different age groups to see what those numbers looked like. And in doing that, they were particularly concerned about what's called the case detection rate, the number of positive cases in people over 60, because we know that older people are more at risk of becoming very sick and needing hospital treatment if they are to catch COVID. The government were also looking at the rate at which cases were rising or falling in a particular local authority area. They were also looking at the positivity rate. So we've had discussions about this before. This is the proportion of tests that are being undertaken and the number of those that are coming back positive. And they were also interested in looking at pressures on the NHS as well. And in balancing which tiers local authorities were put into, obviously the health risks have to be balanced against the impacts on the economy. And so deciding which tier areas go into is not always straightforward. And you know, these are discussions that we have all the time in York when we're looking at the measures we put in place. We're always trying to balance the health impacts to the impacts of the economy, because obviously the economy has an impact on health as well. So when you look at all of that and those 5 indicators, York was put into an area with North Yorkshire. So instead of looking at York's data on its own, the government grouped people in areas, so York was considered alongside North Yorkshire. And even though North Yorkshire's numbers, case numbers are also falling, they haven't been falling as quickly as ours in York. And we know that there are parts of North Yorkshire, and particularly Scarborough and Selby, that continue to have higher rates. And so that has had an impact on the tier that York was put into. I would also say then that when we look at the areas that were put into tier 1, they had lower case numbers than we have in York, and a lower positivity rate as well. So if we think back to where York was in the summer, we had a case rate of under 50, and our positivity rate at that time was less than 1%. And at the moment, our rate today is 132 cases per 100,000, and our positivity rate is between 7 and 8%. We're aiming for a positivity rate of between 4 to 5%. So York is very much heading in the right direction. But we have a little bit further to go based on the government measures before we're into tier 1, sorry. We don't want to go into tier 3 before we head into tier 1. What I will say is that the measures that we're putting in place, we now have a very effective local contact tracing service. We are developing our plans, which are progressing, to extend testing further across the city. So those measures, together with everyone gritting their teeth and continuing to do what we've been doing as a city, washing our hands, wearing face coverings in public spaces and social distancing, will all of that, those simple measures, together with local contact tracing and enhanced testing, I'm convinced will mean that York will be able to continue with our downward trend in cases, and with that goal of getting into tier 1 as quickly as possible. We're all fed up with the pandemic. I know I'm fed up with the pandemic. We all want life to get back to normal. The plans for a COVID vaccination are very exciting. However, the vaccine is unlikely to be available in large enough quantities to vaccinate everyone who would like a vaccine before the summer. So we just need to grit our teeth, continue our efforts, carry on doing what we're doing, and I'm convinced that we'll get there. It's just going to be a little bit of hard work still before we get to that all-important tier 1, and hopefully once the vaccination comes on stream, we'll be able to say goodbye to this pandemic, which is obviously what all of us want. So I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sharon, which is appreciated. And now I'll hand over to Ian to introduce the report to us, please. Ian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The report obviously provides an update on the activities both directly in response to COVID and also the work to support recovery and renewal. There are the 3 areas members will be familiar with in terms of the economic, communities and corporate issues. In the report, we set out information in particular in relation to the business grants scheme, and in that respect we have moved quickly to allocate grants and made the necessary decisions to enable this. The report also touches on the issues in terms of funding to provide food vouchers to children. It's worth reflecting, I think clearly there's a huge amount of work ongoing across all areas of the council. In particular, clearly we have been supporting through our adult services teams, supporting the NHS system as cases have risen in York Hospital, in particular pressures that the hospital has experienced from other areas in the region. Clearly, we do also continue obviously to deliver all of our services in respect of the statutory services we need to provide, major projects are being delivered. We have, as the report refers to, dealt with flooding, and clearly we are very acutely aware that the next few weeks bring risks in terms of that aspect. We've continued to support schools and obviously are developing our budget proposals, plus many activities across the council. And once again, I would just like to thank staff across the whole organisation who continue in very difficult circumstances to deliver outstanding services across all areas. Clearly, the financial position is touched upon later in the agenda, but I think it's just worth repeating that COVID has had a dramatic impact on local authority finances, and that affects us this year, next year. And whilst some of the announcements from the Chancellor yesterday were giving a little bit of additional funding to local authorities, they clearly do not go far enough in terms of pressures we continue to face. And the only other thing I think to finish is just to support everything Sharon said very much. We need to not be complacent, clearly, in terms of this. A lot of good progress has been made, and really I think we just need to carry on doing what we are doing. But we can't let up in terms of that, because we know, particularly from having seen our own experience and also seeing other authorities, that actually things can change quite quickly. We hope, as Sharon said, to get into tier 1, but that does require continued effort from everybody to try and achieve that. I'll stop there, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. And I'll open up for any questions or comments. Councillor Runciman.
Thank you, Chair. Despite the fact we've gone into tier 2, we all recognise that due to the tremendous effort of all the residents of the city, we're doing very well in bringing the infection rate down. I just want to briefly mention the incredible success of our local tracing system, which reaches more than 80% of those residents who haven't been contacted by the central system. When compared to the number reported by the central system, this confirms what we'd known all along. Local expertise, a local voice, a local phone number, that's the most effective way to combat the spread of the virus. Make sure we catch everybody. Support for such an approach and comprehensive support for local public health teams is something we've called on the government to deliver right from the start of the pandemic. Whilst the strength of this approach is beginning to be recognised by the government, we will continue to make the case for more support, as well as proactive and clear communication with the council in general and local teams in particular. We know that testing will be focused on priority groups, and I'm pleased to hear that care home visitors will be one of those groups. And this will be a major task, but it signifies another step forward in our local effort. Effective and efficient testing and tracing is key to slowing the virus and making sure our lives can return to normal as soon as possible. Increased testing capacity in the city is something the leader, along with key partners and public health experts, have called on the government to deliver for months to ensure that our local efforts in stopping the spread of the virus are successful. This last month has seen our residents show incredible commitment, and we must continue in this effort to make sure that we in York are moved down to the lowest restriction level once the first review of the tiers comes into place. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I join with other members in thanking all partners and officers for the work that has been done. But today's announcement putting us into tier 2 will come as a blow to many businesses who've worked very hard to contribute towards the significant fall in cases in the city. We're here tonight to support York's businesses and to protect jobs and livelihoods. So whilst there's a frustration, there will be access to government support grants, and we understand that for many businesses, particularly local pubs and hospitality, today's announcement will mean they remain closed. And that will be a frustration that's been expressed to me during the day. The impact of the announcement is significant, and it's therefore crucial for us all to understand the basis of the reasons for us going into Tier 2, and therefore the hope that we can go into Tier 1. And I think we'll all be working for that. I'd like to pay tribute to the staff and partners who've worked very hard. We will shortly have the COVID support marshals on the ground, but recognizing that there's been a wide range of staff who have been giving confidence to people visiting the city that it is a safe place to come. And I'm sure that all councillors will support those members of staff when they're doing their job. I would also like to thank officers who've managed to get a prompt process off the ground to process the new business support grants outlined in the report and getting the funds into businesses' bank accounts where they're needed. The latest government grants cover both the brief period that York was in Tier 2 restrictions before the current national lockdown, and it will go a long way to help those businesses that have not directly qualified for the latest government support schemes, but recognising that there are companies whose order books dried up from the businesses that they themselves supplied. So it's an important supply chain issue that's been recognised following lobbying that the council has done with other organisations for those businesses and self-employed people who'd fallen between the cracks in government schemes. So whilst we face uncertainty, we will continue working with partners, the York Bid, Make It York, Federation of Small Businesses, Retail Forum, Indie York, to develop a fair and effective way to use government funding to protect thousands of jobs in York using those discretionary funds that are available. And it's been really heartening the way in which partners and the council work together very closely in this time. And this collaboration was shown during York Business Week, held 2 weeks ago, and it was an opportunity for a wide range of businesses to share their experience of their dealing with the pandemic, how they've helped to instill confidence and also loyalty, the ways in which residents have wanted to support local shops even when they're closed through click and collect and a whole variety of methods. I think that's a way forward and it's something to build on for the future. So I would like to pay thanks, and we're all working very hard. So thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Orrell.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's worth highlighting that our council stepped in to provide vouchers for over 2,800 children who qualify for free school meals for the October half term. This followed the government's refusal to do this and a majority MPs supporting the government's decision. This cost our council almost £43,000, and as yet there's no indication that the government will refund this money. This money, as Ian said, is of course just a small extra financial pressure compared to the many millions of pounds that has to be found to cover the shortfall in promised government funds for COVID spending. It's welcome now that the government decided to acknowledge the need for further support to the most vulnerable by announcing the COVID Winter Grant Fund. I'm glad to see that plans have been developed with approximately £200,000 of that funding going towards providing free school meals over the Christmas, February half term and Easter holidays. I know we'll all work to help people through what will be a very difficult winter for many families and residents across the city. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for those comments. The only last thing I'd like to mention before we look at the recommendations in the report is really that our number one priority as a council is remaining the health and well-being of all of our residents, and that principle will continue to guide the decisions that we take. And as we approach the festive season, we'll make sure that we continue to communicate the latest national guidance and what that means for residents. So residents can look out for the new Our City that will be arriving in December, and will outline some of that new guidance and what that new tiered arrangement means. And we will continue to urge, as colleagues have said, the government to recognise the city's hard work by moving us into tier 1 restrictions, and make the case that with the right investment from government, York can be an exemplar of recovery through the difficult months ahead. So with that, we've got the recommendations between pages 15 and 24. Could I see all those in favour of accepting them, please? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting the recommendations for item 6. That then moves us to agenda item 7, the future of the extended city centre Footstreets. And this is included in pages 25 to 128 of your agenda pack. And I can see that we've been joined by James, Andy and Tony to present the report. So I'll hand over to James first.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As you know, we've changed the Footstreets as part of the emergency response to COVID, primarily to allow social distancing and then to support economic recovery, with 80 cafe licences granted since the changes. Surveys show the majority of people, businesses and city centre stakeholder groups support the changes. But any changes to the way the highway space is allocated needs to be managed carefully, as the allocation of space to one use or group then impacts adversely on another. Historically, blue badge holders had a specific exemption to access some Footstreets to park. The emergency changes removed this. Recognising this, we made mitigations as part of the emergency response, including additional blue badge parking spaces both on street and in car park. But mitigations are difficult. As we've heard tonight, the way the street layout affects disabled people is different, and some have welcomed the changes, but I do not underestimate the impact on others. Equally, there is not a universal model that will work for all our businesses. What works well for hospitality trades will not work as well for other types of retail, and vice versa. The proposals have been developed recognising that each sector of the economy relies on the other for the overall economic prosperity of this city. The proposals before you tonight are to extend the majority of the temporary extensions to the end of the government's new rules around cafe licences to September next year. It then sets out a process of how they could be made permanent. The permanent decision will have a separate statutory process. These are choices and difficult choices. It's not going to be possible to meet everyone's needs, but I hope that everyone will acknowledge the step forward in the way we engage on these difficult decisions. And what I think I'd like Andy to do now is just talk a little bit about that engagement.
Thanks, James. As James has said, members asked officers to undertake a full and comprehensive engagement with those who have been affected by the revised Footstreets. Over the last 3 months, we've carried out an in-depth and open conversation with both individuals and stakeholders to help understand issues and build change and solutions collaboratively. COVID has meant face-to-face engagement hasn't been possible in this instance, but we have used a range of measures and online surveys, targeted emails to city centre businesses, and paper-based questionnaires to all households as part of our city. We've also had direct conversations with individuals and advocacy groups, and 2 open invite Zoom workshops, which was jointly facilitated by the York Disability Rights Forum. So in total, we had 1,900 responses to surveys, whilst detail work with blue badge holders and disabled groups engaged 421 people, including those advocacy groups that represent thousands of members. Overall, there was broad support for the extension of the Footstreets from businesses, city centre stakeholders, and with 67% of those surveyed in favour, and 61% of respondents who identified as having a disability also in favour. What the engagement allowed us to understand was the impact on disabled people as individuals. And we've heard from disabled people who feel they benefit from the Footstreets because of the reduction in vehicles, particularly those with visual and hearing impairments. However, we know from a direct conversations with other disabled people and their families that there are people who have been adversely affected by the revised Footstreets and do remain opposed to them in principle. From those conversations, we've proposed a number of immediate mitigations which have been tested through the engagement and proposed further long-term measures to allow us to continue to improve the access. And I think the most important point to make is that the engagement hasn't ended. This is the start of an ongoing conversation where we work collaboratively with anybody affected by the Footstreets, and we ensure we continue to refine and improve the accessibility of the city centre.
So one of the key recommendations is to revert Deangate and College Green to its previous arrangements, which will increase the amount of parking immediately adjacent to the Footstreets. And I suppose my final comment on this is touching on what Andy has said, is that the way we manage highways isn't an aspect we continue to flex, as we have done this year and continue to do across the whole city. We flex in the way the highway is managed, and we'll continue to do that as that conversation that Andy has talked about goes on. And we'll obviously continue to keep the quality impact assessment under review during that process as well. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask Janie to come in, particularly with reference to your last comment, James, on that equality impact assessment. Janie.
Thank you, Chair. Before making a decision, I would like to remind all councillors this evening of your public sector equality duty, which is outlined in the implications section of the report at page 48 of the agenda. I would also like you to consider the mitigation details which are contained within the body of the report. Finally, I would ask all councillors to fully consider the detailed equality impact assessments as part of your decision-making process, and these can be found at pages 81 and 89 of the agenda respectively. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much to James, Andy and Janie, and I also note that Tony is here in case of any questions that you might ask. So I'm going to first hand to Councillor de Gorn as the portfolio holder, then I'll open it up for any questions or comments.
Thank you. Can I first begin by thanking all the public speakers this evening and the officers who've organised and conducted the in-depth engagement that's been referred to in some detail on paragraph 23 onwards on page 35, and of course everyone who has participated in these consultations. As outlined in the report, the proposal before us this evening have been developed based on that extensive consultation, which includes the specific engagement with local businesses and disabled groups in the city. And as has just been said, this of course is not the end of the process, but signals a way forward which will take account of the changing levels of national and regional restrictions arising from the level of infection at the time. And just to reference the one of the public speakers, there is on page 41, there's specific reference to, which I think was a fairly recent addition, to looking at the needs of disabled people and specifically in relation to mobility, which might be trike, bicycle, other than just mobility scooters. So there's a commitment to look at that as part of the ongoing process. Of course, the original decision to extend our Footstreets was taken in response to pandemic and the national restrictions in order to allow people in the city safely social distance and at the same time provide our local business community with the space that they need to adapt their operations and to support their viability during this extremely difficult economic period. I think it's worth highlighting that feedback from the York Business Improvement District has been positive, and I welcome their work and support. The bid supports the continuation of Footstreet extensions on the basis that we continue to be mindful of the ever-changing business climate. And I think at least a couple of the speakers who weren't able to get onto the list have sent written representations saying something about the impact it's had on their business or their environment. The bid has been grateful that the Footstreet hours were adapted for the second national lockdown, which we're now in, with the hours being revised at fairly short notice, since that has helped them to support them in offering takeaway services whilst their premises are closed to customers. With the ongoing impact on business, it's proposed to continue the majority of these temporary measures until the end of September 21. The exception, as you've just heard, apologise if I'm repeating some of this, but I think it's important to stress that part of the mitigation which has now been identified is to relax some of the restrictions that were put in of the Monk Bar to College Green and Deangate. By removing this area from the temporary restrictions, we would reinstate some parking capacity for blue badge holders as close as possible to the edge of the Footstreets. Whilst the additional free disabled parking created at Monk Bar car park will be reduced and the free shuttle service discontinued, this change to the extent of the restriction should help to mitigate the removal of that shuttle and enable more blue badge holders to park close to the edge of the city centre. We will also, of course, be monitoring this closely to ensure that access to and from Monkgate is maintained so that loading restrictions can be adjusted if found to be necessary. A further 16 new dedicated disabled parking spaces have been provided during the course of the recent months, close to, as pointed out in point 22 of the report. Last thing that I would say is that we are pleased to note the comments that have been made that the very extensive consultation to 1,900 responses did indicate that although the feedback on the whole has been positive, the disadvantages for some are in some way compensated by benefits for other people with disabilities, as outlined in point 25. So 67% of those who participated in the consultation supported the extension of the Footstreets, and 61% of those who were in favour identified that they of those who had a disability, should I say, were also in favour. And with that in mind, I would happily, I'd be happy to support the recommendations, but taking a point on, as has been said, I think that the public speakers have indicated that we do need to take this issue very seriously and do everything that we can to mitigate the impact, which is why in the report there's whole sections about mitigation, both on paragraph 44 and later on paragraph 56 refer to some detailed mitigations that we will consider and discuss as we go forward.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank businesses for their active involvement in the consultation process. A number have communicated directly with me, but they've been very much involved with the My City Centre steering group, the key city centre stakeholders, and the wider consultation, which has involved a large amount of members of the public as well. And their proactive engagement and feedback has helped to shape the report, because we accept that some of the changes had been for the benefit of some, but had impacted on others. And it has been an evolving strategy throughout the summer. So the first-hand experience represented in the report clearly sets out the benefits, but also the challenges as detailed by the public speakers. Footstreets have a history with York, and the revision of the city centre Footstreets played a significant role over the summer in keeping some businesses going that would have otherwise gone under. And therefore, whilst there had been adaptations by businesses, there's been a constant evolution of trade in the city centre. The report also outlines the wider benefit of the promotion of a family-friendly early evening economy, and that's something that the administration had been very keen through Purple Flag to really look at where we wanted the city centre to go, to be more welcoming, particularly in the early evening, to keep activity there, and by allowing pavement cafe licenses, James Gilchrist mentioned that 80 had been provided, and an integral part of having the license was that there would be traffic orders to support that. Whilst the Footstreets extension and longer hours have been welcomed by most businesses and were supported by the York Retail Forum and York Bid on behalf of their members, we're aware of the challenges and objections raised by businesses, particularly retail and service industries, who rely on frequent deliveries. I think the delivery aspect is something that we will continue to look at, and I know that officers have been very proactive in supporting different means of deliveries, and as the focus on the last mile goes, there's been some rapid changes there. So I'd like to know how the report looks at the overall strategy and sought to accommodate some of those concerns and flexibility, recognizing that businesses may need to adapt further. There will be continued need for social distancing. We need to keep the city centre functioning, whilst recognising we're all working together to restrict infections. But we know that Christmas is an important feature for retail. It gets them the money that keeps them going through the rest of the year. So we do need to make sure that they are supported. Councillor de Gorn has highlighted the extensive engagement, and I think that's been a tribute to the way in which officers have worked in very difficult circumstances. I remember as chair of my city centre talking through how we were going to start the process, and if anyone had said, and by the way, in a few weeks you will do all of these changes, you will then have to implement a consultation process during a period where you cannot meet people face to face, it would have been considered out of this world. But that's a challenge that officers have taken on board and really done a tremendous job to engage with people, and recognizing that the process is not finished, that it's an ongoing business, and I'm sure there will be dedicated ways of ensuring that the views of everyone is taken on board. And one of the public speakers did mention that some of the discussions have been going on for some years, in fact decades. Fossgate, I do remember a lot of discussion in the early part of this century. So it's something that is a constantly evolving situation. But I would urge everyone, businesses, residents, to continue with the engagement, because it is something that I think we all want to come to a solution. But many of the speakers have recognised that it is always a complex situation. The city centre is a very complicated set of transport arrangements, but I think that there is the willingness to make sure this works. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to thank officers, and I recognise that it is difficult times, and this is a difficult piece of work that's being done. And I also welcome the commissioned report from Disabled Motor in UK. I think there is a lot of anger around this issue, and potentially I feel some growing mistrust, which I know can be brought around quickly, and I hope that does happen with what officers and executive members have been saying about future and further engagement. I think that's really important. I am concerned, however, about the social model of disability not being the primary motive in these decisions. The adverse effects and impacts referred to by executive members are being felt by people who are disabled, and therefore, because of these decisions, people are excluded from living with equal opportunities. In response to the consultation, 62%, nearly 2/3 of those responding believed Footstreets extensions made them less likely or far less likely to visit the city centre. And the majority of respondents didn't believe there's enough parking close enough for them. I would just like to ask one question about the engagement and the number of people who have identified as disabled responding compared to how many blue badges are issued by City of York Council, and the way that we could engage with those people in a consultation, and if the executive member feels that it's adequate or just.
Thank you very much. James, if I send this any technical response to the questions to you, and obviously Councillor de Gaulle might want to come in later. James.
I think, well, I'd bring in Andy on the engagement and the comments about the way we've engaged with disabled people, because disabled people is much more than blue badge holders, and that's why the consultation was phrased in the way it was. Andy, do you want to?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously we have communicated the changes directly with blue badge holders, but I mean, I think that point, which I know has just been made, is wider than blue badge in terms of disabled groups. And what we sought to do was basically contact everybody in the city through our city, and that ability to do that questionnaire, which could be completed on paper or online, which obviously gave a different choice of options. But then where we've tried to really draw out is to have those sort of almost one-to-one conversation with people who've wanted to have those and have the depth of engagement to it. So it's not just about sort of arbitrary numbers of X number of people said this. It's really understanding the lived experience of those people, which I think particularly the work we've done with disabled advocacy groups as well, to understand as well as speaking to the individuals on the calls has helped us to do that and try and see people as individuals and make sure that we've got a range of different solutions. We're obviously saying that we're setting some immediately in place today, but it's about continuing to evolve those and make sure they're responding to everybody's needs.
Thank you very much for that. Shall I go to Councillor Craghill, or do you want to come in next, Councillor de Gaulle?
I'll wait till Councillor Craghill in case there's other points she wants to make.
Councillor Craghill.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I just wanted to make a few comments on the disability issues, on the disability access issues. I'll try not to repeat what other people have said, but I just think it's worth emphasising a few points that obviously, in a similar way as Andy Kerr has described, that people with disabilities are all very different, and therefore they have very different needs and a range of different needs, and obviously these changes to the city centre have clearly had some negative impacts on some people, as we've heard this evening, but they've also benefited others. We've heard through the public engagement process that there is a significant group of people with disabilities who found the traffic-free streets a really big improvement, a really positive experience that allows them to move around in the city centre more easily. I do think it's important to recognise that aspect of the issue. At the same time, though, obviously, we absolutely should be doing everything we can to meet everyone's needs and to enable everyone to meet their own needs where they can. So and we need to make it possible for everyone to access the city centre. So I do think that the engagement process that has taken place has been a good one and a really good step in the right direction. And I'm often critical of engagement processes. I think this one has been really good. I think it's involved many different engagement channels, as Andy Kerr has just described, to reach as many people as possible. And it has identified the challenges, as well as identifying a wide range of possible solutions that we can continue to keep on looking at and keep on engaging about. We have the immediate changes and mitigation identified in the report at paragraph 44. I think they're a good step forwards. They will offer more blue badge places closer to the central shopping area. and they will help to increase access to information and awareness of what is actually available. I don't disagree, though, that more could be done. So I do also very much welcome the proposals that are set out in the paper at paragraph 57. They include things like a full review of the shop mobility offer, the creation of very high quality routes from a number of car parks into the city centre, where I think we can make a significant improvement, really, a feasibility study into a city centre shuttle service, and also further engagement on the recommendations that came out of the independent review of the access offer. So I do hope these actions can also proceed as quickly as possible, and that we can continue the engagement with the Disability Rights Forum, which I think has been very positive, and with other people with disabilities. And as other people have said, the engagement doesn't end here, it needs to continue forwards.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor de Gaulle.
I think that gives you a bit of a flavour of some of the work that officers have been doing on this. So I do very much endorse this as being quite an exciting start to a process that could transform our offer for everyone in the city centre, not just people with blue badge holders, but whatever sort of disability and elderly residents. We've got an ageing population, we've got a world-class historic city that people will want, in years to come, will still want to come and visit and experience. And if we can find a way to allow them to experience that without having to dodge around traffic and be concerned about moving vehicles in what is described as a foot street, I think that is something which we should very much welcome. And as has been said, in fact, one of the speakers who wasn't able to speak commented about this being an issue which has long been a concern in the city. It's unfortunate we've had to have a pandemic to force us into really getting to grips with it. But I think, as has been suggested, I mean, obviously, these things come down to funding. But if we could come up with a means of offering a shuttle service that anybody, whether they've got a blue badge or whether just elderly and want to visit and be able to get around the city centre, could make use of, that will be a fantastic outcome from this, which has been a difficult experience for everybody. Social distancing, the businesses, everyone has had a very difficult time of this. But it perhaps has opened our eyes to a way of transforming the experience for people visiting and residents of our city to get around within the city centre safely and securely. We haven't really touched on it so far, but in the report there is also reference to the work that was being done in any case about keeping safe from the terrorist threat, which at the present time may not be uppermost in people's minds, but we do want to keep people safe from whatever threat it might be, whether it's from terrorists or from COVID. So I very much welcome the work that officers have done and the commitment to going forward, continuing dialogue with our residents and visitors to improve the offer.
Thank you very much. I think I'd equally like to thank all of the public speakers and those that engaged in that public consultation process. And I'll just come back to you, James, before we go on to the recommendations. Councillor Craghill talked about some of that ongoing engagement and review of those possibilities moving forward, whether you wanted to mention or reflect on that.
Well, I think obviously there needs to be ongoing engagement. That's a given that I don't think anyone would want to steer away from, because we can continue to evolve the arrangements. Any permanent process would obviously have its own considerations, its own equality impact and its own decision making. So the decision today is to start that process, not to make any conclusions about it. and that ongoing engagement as we lead up to those decisions is equally important.
Thank you very much for that. So we have in front of us the recommendation between pages 25 and 128, and I'm sure we will have considered the advice from Jania earlier in the meeting. So could I therefore see all those in favour of accepting those recommendations, please? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting those recommendations on agenda item 7. Thank you, everybody. And that then takes us on to agenda item 8, which is the York Railway Station Gateway Funding and Delivery. And this is pages 129 to 174 in your pack. And again, we're joined by James and Tony for this, and I'll hand over to James.
Okay, I'll try and be briefer for you this time. This scheme was approved almost 2 years ago by Executive following the community engagement and involvement that was done that saw exhibitions in the station. And at Executive, you agreed a refined design based upon those outcomes and that consultation. You also agreed that we could submit a planning application, and we've done that, and we continue to address the details that emerge through that planning process. The scheme is underpinned by an absolute partnership between the local council and the rail industry, as the scheme requires taking space from the rail industry to create new highway space so that we can improve the pedestrian experience, take vehicles out of the portico, create additional bus stop capacity, those sorts of things. So it is an absolute partnership. What the report sets out before you is how that partnership will come together to actually deliver the scheme, and also seeks approval to spend budget on some of the enabling works. So happy to take any questions, and I've got Tony and a team behind Tony indeed if there are any detailed questions.
Thank you very much for that, James. So happy to open it to any questions and comments from exec colleagues. I think from my perspective, I'd just like to welcome the progress that's been made on this project and underline how pleased I am, and I know the executive is, to see the York Station Front project coming to fruition. The proposals, as you've mentioned, have been through extensive consultation with local residents, businesses and visitors, which have ultimately shaped these proposals before us this evening. And I'd like to thank everyone who's got involved with that consultation and helped us to reach this milestone. I think what's also particularly pleasing is the external funding that we've been able to secure to deliver this project, with just over 25 million available from the West Yorkshire Transport Fund and also the Transforming Cities bid to invest back in the city. The station front upgrade will not only provide a much needed modernisation of the station and surrounding area, but also create a fitting gateway into our city and also form an intrinsic part of the wider York Central scheme, which will promote clean and inclusive growth in the city for many years to come. I can't see any other hands or comments. So with that, we've got the recommendations in the report between pages 129 and 174. Could I see those in favour of accepting them? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of that. And thank you to James and to Tony. That then moves us on to agenda item 9, which is the update on the asset management strategy 2017 to 2022. And this is between pages 175 and 258 in your agenda packs. And I can see that we've been joined by Tracy and Nick. So over to Tracy to start.
Thank you very much, Chair. You have before you a comprehensive review of the Council's asset strategy and the work that we've undertaken to deliver that. And the report sets out proposed revisions to that strategy to take us through to 2025 and suggests an additional priority to reflect the importance of our commitment to carbon neutrality. It also then goes on to provide an update on the delivery of the strategy and further proposals for some of those assets within each of those portfolios. It sets out progress on delivering our housing delivery programme with 2 new opportunities for housing delivery at York Central and at the site of Willow House. It proposes, it sets forward our progress on the management of our commercial estate, with some positive progress on low vacancies in our existing estate, with good negotiation to support tenants during the COVID crisis, and maintain a healthy level of income collection to support the work of the council and support the council's budgets. It sets out a long-term lease of the Guildhall to university via the York Science Park Limited, and it sets out proposals to bring Castlegate into the commercial portfolio. It reviews a number of vacant assets that we have in our estate, and puts forward proposals to dispose of 5 of those assets. And in all, the recommendations will generate in the region of £5.9 million worth of capital receipts, and have a positive revenue impact on general fund of about £490,000 per year. I just need to, without going into each of the detailed business cases, because we have spent 2.5 hours on Monday night at scrutiny going through each of those, but I just wanted to draw to your attention an error in the articulation of recommendation F2, and which suggests that 103 Heslington Road needs to be transferred to the HRA. It doesn't. That just simply needs to read that the recommendation is to dispose of that particular asset. So as I just mentioned, the whole report has been extensively discussed at a pre-decision scrutiny on Monday night. I have shared the draft minutes with executive, and just in brief, the key issues that they raised. They welcomed the opportunity to input into the report ahead of your decision making tonight, and they requested the same approach to further consideration of one of the areas for discussion in the report, which is the proposed review of West Offices and Hazel Court. They also welcomed the proposal to review progress on the delivery of all of these proposals on a quarterly basis by the Executive Member for Finance and Performance. They raised one further issue, which was a request to review the issue of the consideration of the Oakhaven recommendation in this report by health scrutiny. So if I can just update you on where that's come from. The Oakhaven site was discussed at health scrutiny at the beginning of the year, I think in February, as part of a broader discussion around the provision on the arrangements for the Lowfields Care Village and the provisions of extra care on that site. The committee requested an update on the Oakhaven site, and it was made clear at that point that that would be as part of this broader asset strategy report, and it would not be exclusively around the Oakhaven site. As a vacant corporate asset, it is actually the remit of the Corporate Scrutiny Management Committee, not particularly of the Health Scrutiny Committee. However, unfortunately, during the interruption from COVID, that request wasn't picked up. However, the executive member had already referred the whole report to Corporate Scrutiny Management Committee, who are, as the appropriate body, have reviewed that. And today I've had confirmation from the Chair of Health Scrutiny that he has now agreed with the Director of People to receive a further report in the new year on sufficiency and commissioning of older persons accommodation, which is clearly within their purview and their remit. The issue of the future of the asset has therefore been scrutinised by the appropriate committee, and that view has the agreement of the Chair of the Corporate Scrutiny Management Committee, who also has an overview of the work of all scrutiny committees.
Thank you very much for that, Tracy. So happy to open this item for any comment or questions. I can see Councillor Eyre has come off mute.
Thank you very much, Chair. To give you some background, I think this is probably my first attempt at bringing in cohesive oversight of how we use our commercial assets and our estate to a public meeting. It was something I was very clear when I first became portfolio holder. I wanted to get a better public understanding of how this works. As Tracy alluded to, as I mentioned to scrutiny, the intention is to, in future, bring regular reports to my decision session to highlight other asset issues that come up as they arise, and also how the estate is functioning. I think one of the other key things that we tried to achieve, and we've seen at previous meetings, is getting a better understanding of how the estate acts as a whole, how it functions as a whole, and not to take things in isolation, which sometimes can get lost. So I think as an example being the discussions that we've had perhaps around the older person's accommodation, which when seen in isolation seems quite stark. However, in reality, this was part of a multi-million-pound investment in improving the provision we have in the city, a provision that, and a multi-million-pound investment that was funded through the sale of surplus assets. And that as a whole, when you look at it in reports like this, has delivered a net increase of 86 residential care beds by the end of the programme, and we'll see an increase of 278 extra care apartments as part of that process. I think it's important to have the full picture rather than looking at individual assets in total isolation. I think as Tracy has alluded to in regards to the process, as it was mentioned, scrutiny were informed in February that this report would be coming. The OK Blunt issue would be addressed as part of the wider asset management report. That couldn't happen in March and has only managed to make it through to executive now. It did, as at our request, go to scrutiny first, with all of the associated information that scrutiny required. All the confidential annexes were there. There was a full opportunity to scrutinise that process in absolute detail. I think there was a suggestion that we should delay. I think any delay in that process around that now would have significant impact to the council. I would suggest probably in the region of a 7-figure loss in terms of income to the council. And as I've mentioned, the purpose of this report is to show how the portfolio links together and how you can't start to unpick individual strands of that without threatening to unravel the process as a whole. And as you start to unravel the process, you put at risk the delivery of the affordable housing, the overall delivery of the older person's accommodation project, as I mentioned, and also some of the key regeneration schemes that are part of our capital programme. It's also probably wise to note that within this report, there are further asks around, especially from the Holgate ward councillors in particular, around further investment in the Riverside Path and also around the Network Rail Canteen on the York Central site. Such investment does require additional capital receipts and being able to deliver on some of those incomes. So I think we can't just assume that we can't bring income in and then still be able to commit potentially expensive assets to and commitments to things such as the Riverside Path. I would say in consultation that we've had with some of the officers that if the agreed proposal for Oakhaven does not go ahead as we propose it, then some of the urgency around that decision may not necessarily be there, and I would be happy to move a recommendation that we don't go straight to a market sale in that instance, but bring back a further report if the option that we have here isn't possible. So apologies to a lot of people for the complexities of this report. It's quite a lengthy report, and that reflects the complexities of the portfolio we have. So I think Nick Nick Collins, our commercial management, is keen to mention several times over 1,300 assets, around about £346 million worth of assets that we sit on. To provide some clarity, they're not all about commercial return to the council, so they include our operational as well as our commercial estate. But that commercial estate is absolutely vital to providing us with the income and support we need to be able to deliver frontline services, around about £6 million a year in revenue that goes on to allow us to deliver those services that people really need at the front line. And it's not just about money. I think as we've seen this year, especially around the COVID crisis around March, it provides us that flexibility to support the economy and to support businesses in the city centre. It allowed us to take those steps to put the 3-month rental pause in there for assets that we had to give those businesses the breathing space they perhaps don't have. And it's past testament to that around the low level of vacancies that we have on our commercial estate compared to a lot of the private sector businesses around the high street. And we can't see those really struggling for those vacancy rates, but we're able to step in because of the assets that we have. Individual portfolio holders might want to jump in on some of the more interesting aspects of the report, and it perhaps is me taking credit for some things that aren't always mine. So some of the highlights I picked up were the new woodland, 153 acres community woodland that we will be delivering as part of this, the Riverside Path, as was noted, our extensive housing delivery programme with over 140 homes under construction, shortly to go forward with 220 at Burnholme, Duncan Place and Ordnance Lane. York Central, our opportunity to really deliver on the land assets that we have there. Willow House, which has always been a challenging site, and we're looking to unlock that for further development. Amy Johnson Way, a site which we currently run. At the moment, we pay rent on that. By being able to take that on ownership outright, that allows us to deliver an extra £60,000 to help with delivering frontline services. The Guildhall, we've managed to contain the vast majority of the COVID pressures within the asset budget and the commercial budget. And I think it's really important that we've been able to, especially in the current climate, de-risk issues around the office accommodation that we have there by signing the deal that we have with York University. It means that income is guaranteed in the short term rather than being left open as it may possibly be. We still have work to do around the restaurant units, but I'm confident that we have the opportunity to do that. And finally, I think around Castlegate, It's an example of how we did really try in terms of how we could bring extra community benefit to that scheme through our work with the Civic Trust. That didn't happen, which has led to, unfortunately, to a delay in releasing that asset. But we're keen at the moment. We've got a plan now to bring that forward and get that asset back into use. So I think with that, Chair, I'm happy to support the recommendations on page 176 to 177. I think it may compete with York Central as possibly the longest list of recommendations that this executive has faced.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Eyre. Now, because I can see that we've got 4 councillors with their hands up, before we go into that or into a discussion or questions, I'm going to use my prerogative to take now as our 10-minute break, so I don't have to cut something in half. Apologies to Tracy and Nick, but now I have to wait for those questions. But as we said, so in 10 minutes would be 7:33. If you could all be back and on your screens, and then we'll proceed with the meeting then. But for now, if you could just switch your cameras off and go on mute, and then come back in 10 minutes. Thanks all. Hello, everybody. I think that we're back and I can start. And if one of our technical officers could just put a message in the chat that all is well, and we'll then carry on. So welcome back to the executive meeting. We were on agenda item 9, update on the asset management strategy. We'd heard from officers and also Councillor Eyre as the relevant portfolio holder. And then I was just about to go to councillors for any questions or comments, which I'll start to do now. If those councillors who had indicated virtually that they wanted to speak could just make sure that they've done so again, so I make sure I bring the right people in, that would be appreciated. And the first was Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I want to thank officers for this asset management report. It's a large report, a big piece of work, and I do want to thank the executive member as well for the comments he made and work to bring this about. I think the key summary setting out how the financial performance and social outcomes can be improved are good. However, I do have some concerns about the measurement of the social outcomes. Just run through a couple of the items in the report. 22, the Avenue. I feel like there has never been a high level viability assessment for that site, contrary to how it was kind of referred to in the call-in when that item went to call-in. And I think what's included in these papers do show that the potential options, full options, weren't ever considered. I'll wind that point up because I've made it many times before, but at that call-in, the assessment management strategy, the executive member for finance referred to it in a way of improving it for ward members. Now, I think that might have happened in the email I've just read about the recommendations from CSMC earlier in this week, but before then it didn't seem, in my view, to be evidenced in this report. And you know, my feeling is that greater public transparency, especially on these items in asset management, would be better for the general public, of course. And you know, with reference to that, again, Morel House, this is the first time I've understood that it wasn't going to be used for council housing, which it absolutely should be used for. And to find out through the publishing of these papers is disappointing. I think on Oakhaven, a lot's been said, and my colleagues in Holgate Ward, Rachel Melly, Councillor Melly's written to you, and Councillor Taylor obviously spoke at the beginning of the meeting. I think there's a case here for deferring this decision if you can come to that agreement. I do feel like there's a capital receipt versus council developing argument at play throughout a lot of this paper. And I can understand, obviously, the need to realise savings and release capital receipts, as noted in paragraph 60. But crucially, I think without an assessment of social value, these decisions are possible, the social value of these decisions are possible options. The costs to the council and society will be met at a future date, potentially when there are more savings needed to be made and no more assets to sell. Paragraph 58 makes reference to a land value figure. I'd like to ask the executive, what value would you place on the social value from developing this site into something the council can ensure fully meets residents' demands? And what would that social value add to the land value cost, and then justify council-led development or other development that meets residents' needs more fully, such as independent care or extra care living? And finally, on that point, senior council officers, I think it's been referred to in this meeting about the need, the Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Committee receiving a report with potential options earlier at the start of this year. I just wonder, you know, has that work started or been completed? And are you aware of it as an executive? And is there not a way that we can let that democratic process work out on Oakhaven? And you know, a question would be if you are as an executive interested in those views, should they be allowed to be arrived at? Sorry for taking so much time. I've just got one more point to make, a short one. A couple of questions really on the purchase of Amy Johnson Way. Word this correctly. Do we have confidence in the valuation, given the current national economic situation? And linked to debt repayment, minimum revenue provision on this purchase, as a comparator against investment in the housing revenue account. Why? Yeah, sorry, just got to get the wording right here. Don't want to go into private session if I don't need to. I think officers know what I'm saying, and I want to understand why there's a difference in capital repayment in the different types of loans that we're taking out here, specifically housing revenue account investment as opposed to this capital investment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Tracy, if I could bring you in to pick up those questions, please.
Certainly. In terms of the ambition for improving ward member engagement in the decision making on our asset strategy, I think that point has been accepted from scrutiny earlier in the week, but also in Councillor Ayres' ambition to have a quarterly report on that, so that we've got greater transparency and a greater regular review of the assets. It's not just a kind of once only opportunity to take a look at that. So I think that point has been accepted. In terms of the Oakhaven request for a deferral, I think that does create the risk that the deal that is currently on the table does not stay on the table, and therefore the beneficial deal and the capital receipt that we could achieve from that doesn't get achieved. I think that the tension between capital receipt versus community benefit can sometimes seem like a very stark one, especially if you only look at it from the context of individual assets. What we try to do here is look at the programme overall, so you can see where we have to target financial capital receipts to be able to afford the rest of the programme, to be able to reinvest in other assets and in other community benefits. So the Oakhaven being a case in point, where the whole of the older persons accommodation programme is predicated on the release of the capital value with the former older persons accommodation sites. And we still need to be able to release those some further capital to be able to pay for the older persons accommodation programme. So the community benefits that are generated from that still need paying for. The balance between capital receipts and the council as a developer is one that we evaluate on all sites. Is if we've got a site that might be suitable for instance, for our housing delivery programme or our older persons accommodation programme or our mental health residential programme, then we will evaluate that as to whether or not that particular site meets the objectives and whether that is the most financially advantageous way of delivering the outcomes of those programmes. And us as a developer on the site does not always add up to the best solution for every site that we've got. There are many where I've made a very strong case for us doing exactly that, but there are also limitations on the council's capacity to borrow either for the general fund or the HRA. Or of our ability to be cost effective in those developments. So for instance, on Oakhaven, we have reviewed whether or not that would be something where the council would include it within its housing delivery programme. But based on land values for the transfer from general fund to HRA, based on the size of the plot, and the complexity of developing out, that was not judged to be the best option for the housing delivery programme, and instead the two that are included in the paper were seen to be better options. So those evaluations and those judgments, they are complex, and they do need care. It's not always the case that we can simply just take every opportunity to develop on our own land, and we do need to make some longer term decisions about which assets we retain because they are of value to us in the long term, and which assets we need to release, and from that generate the capital receipt to reinvest in the rest of our programme. On the issue of the eco centre, I think if I understand your correction, your point correctly, without having to go into private session, yes, we do have confidence in the valuation. We also have a fairly strong position that the value of assets in York, although they may be temporarily suppressed by COVID, the developer interest across the piece has not gone away. In fact, values are holding pretty steady in all the conversations that we're having. So I don't think this is one that's going to be knocked by the temporary impact of COVID on the property world. In terms of the calculation of investment costs for general fund and HRA, this might be one that's better to ask Debbie to just come in and comment on how those arrived at.
Debbie?
Sorry, Tracy, I didn't quite catch that.
Councillor Myers asked the question about how we calculate the cost of borrowing for general fund versus the HRA.
Well, there's no difference in how you calculate necessarily the cost of borrowing between the two funds.
Okay, thank you very much. I can see that Councillor Eyre has indicated as well, but what I'll do, Councillor Eyre, is bring you in at the end in case there's other points to respond to, and got quite a few speakers. So I'll first go to Councillor Craghill.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to make a few comments about the housing delivery aspects of this paper, which I think is a very positive paper, and I very much welcome it. And as other people have said, recognise all the work that's gone into it. I think we've already had a mention that the housing delivery programme is progressing well. And houses are selling well, starting to sell well at Lowfield Green, and we have 3 sites in the pipeline, 2 at planning and 1 still doing some more engagement before going to planning, which will deliver 220 new highly energy efficient homes on zero carbon sites. But I just wanted to particularly mention I'm pleased to welcome the inclusion in this paper of a process to start to bring the former older person's home at Willow House off Warmgate into the housing delivery programme. As the paper says, a high-level review has identified the site could deliver around 40 new homes, whilst the scope of the planned public engagement will mean there is potential for additional new homes in the surrounding area that can be considered in consultation with local residents and of course with ward councillors. The public engagement will also be able to look at the possibilities for improving outdoor spaces and community provision in the area. For all the reasons that the paper sets out, this building's now been empty for some time, and this proposal does open the way to doing something really innovative in this area, as I said, working collaboratively with local people and local stakeholders. I also, just to finish, I welcome the possible addition of to our self-build offer of the Morale House site, but that is subject to further assessments. But I'm also really delighted that the paper is proposing that we take the lead on delivering sustainable, affordable and innovative housing on York Central. I think approval of funding in this paper to master plan a part of the York Central site, working with the York Central partners and potentially another registered provider, as well as of course with local residents. This will enable us to start setting the high standards for housing development on the site that we want to see. And I think it represents a very exciting opportunity to make progress in this respect. So I think that's all I wanted to say. I think I'll leave the technical debates to Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Widdowson.
Thank you. Well, I'm not going to speak at length as the report provides an extensive outline of the strategy, but I would like to take a minute to welcome the significant amendment to the overall objectives of the Council's asset management strategy. This review commits us to strongly incorporate the Council's commitment to net carbon neutrality by 2030 in the way we manage our extensive list of assets. This stands alongside the ambitious and innovative approach we're taking in developing our housing delivery programme, as mentioned by Councillor Craghill. As set out in point 7 in the report, these carbon neutrality objectives will see the Council operate our estate sustainably, efficiently and dynamically to support the effective delivery of Council services and achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. The broader sustainability objective is also clearly present in the recommendations we're asked to agree tonight, such as the investment in the eco-centre to fund green infrastructure improvements to the building, reviews of the possible use of PV array at Harewood Wind to generate sustainable green energy, water-sourced heat pumps at the Guildhall, and of course the next steps for our community woodland. I'd like to welcome this update to the report as another important step towards adapting our wider policy and management approach to the challenges brought about by the climate emergency as we take steps towards our ambitious carbon neutrality goal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor de Gorn.
Oops. I'd like to make 2 points actually. Firstly, on the item about the Riverside Path, I very much welcome the proposal to either purchase or lease that land, particularly if it gives us the opportunity through the York Central development to improve that route. I am aware that it's a very popular cycle route, which is quite constrained in terms of width. I appreciate that there's not much that we can do about Scarborough Bridge, but the rest of the route, you know, at busy times would be certainly something which would be ideal for if we could take a longer term view and enhance that as part of the York Central development. Then the second point I wanted to make was a more of a question really. It relates to the on paragraph 120, there's reference to the sale of 2 herdsman cottages, one of which is in my ward. But interestingly, obviously, apart from being grade 2 listed buildings, which obviously gives some protection to their external appearance, I'm pleased to see that the report does say that they should be treated as a part of the open space, which is our strays, our stray land. And on paragraph 141, there's reference to the legal process for open space, disposal of open space. And the last on paragraph, it's sorry, so on the top of page 209, anyhow, there's reference to going through the legal process for disposal of such properties, which gives the opportunity for any legal objections. The question I had really was, I think knowing both of these properties, given that they are sort of literally on the edge of a stray, the sort of area within the curtilage of a property is visually part of the stray. So the question is whether might be an opportunity to avoid sort of concerns if there was some commitment to maintaining the sort of the aspects of the buildings. I'm trying to avoid straying into planning terms, but I'm just conscious that could be a main objection if people felt that it was going to have lots of buildings and high fences and what have you that would screen the properties from view, because at the moment they do sort of visually form part of the stray.
I think, Councillor Degon, that probably is a planning issue that would be asserted through the listing and their adjacency and their relationship to the strays.
Okay, right.
The legal process we go through is to have permission to dispose of because of their status on the stray and that then therefore extends their designation as public open space, even though they're already fenced off. So there's a kind of two-stage legal process we would need to go through to dispose of.
Okay.
We can't put any kind of covenant on there that would prescribe that.
But that's what I was
yeah.
asking. So I think perhaps if just whatever process we go through, we can be clear about that, because I would imagine that will be the main objection to the disposal.
Yeah, we can probably take that. We'll need to discuss that with our legal colleagues as to whether a restrictive covenant that controls the perimeter or the aspect can be applied based on our ownership of the adjoining strays. There may be a possibility that could be done and built into the terms, the heads of terms of the sale, and made contractually binding. We'll take that one away and have a look at it.
Thank you.
Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I think the comprehensive nature of the strategy document in front of us is helpful. And just looking at it from the point of view of the council supporting employment by keeping work going, projects going in the city, it's really important to demonstrate that, because the discussions that I've had with certainly organisations like the Chamber of Commerce is that they've been very keen to enable projects to keep going, in order that there's a pipeline of work to keep people in employment. But it's also looking at the opportunities to create space for new jobs, and the Guildhall is an example of that. And I'd just like a comment on the commercial property in terms of how we're utilising that to support businesses in the city, because I know there's a potential review of that, just to show that that's being utilised. I do particularly favour the member engagement. I think as ward councillors, we all have issues that come forward that our community expects us to be able to explain, and I think that the commitment to enhance member engagement is important with that. I think in terms of progressing the use of the plot at Oakhaven for a care home, it's been empty for a while, and so seeing that brought into use would be very helpful. And progressing the Lowfield Care Village, I think that will be very well received by residents in the surrounding areas.
Tracy, anything you want to come back on?
Well, if I can come back to Councillor Waller on the importance of using the council's assets to create the spaces for business growth in the city, I think it's a really important facet of our strategy. And within this report, you can see the investment in the Guildhall and the really great arrangement we now have with York Science Park to be able to operate that for the uses of small businesses. A similar arrangement at the Eco Centre, slightly different business focus for that, but lots and lots of small businesses resident there. In fact, Nick's just let another of our units on there this afternoon. So it is a hugely important part of the support infrastructure for small businesses in the city. And then adding Castlegate as some further space into our commercial portfolio creates further space there. I think just to come back on your point about supporting employment by creating a pipeline of work and looking at new skills and new industries, we're all really excited about the community woodland and what role that might play, not just in creating a carbon sink for the city and playing its part in carbon neutrality, not just for the amenity space it will create on that side of the city, but also because of the opportunity for that to provide a focus for developing new kinds of jobs in kind of green industries. So certainly looking at the tree planting aspect of it, the coppicing of it, and what other opportunities we might be able to build into that I think that's got a real future to it. So definitely support Councillor Waller's comments there.
Thank you very much for that. And then back to Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reassure Councillor Myers regarding the comment on social value. I think the programme has been around for a long time, the Older Persons Accommodation Project. I'm not sure when Councillor Myers was around when it was first put about. And one of the issues of seeking social value from all the properties we have is that things take time. So we look at things on here, Oakhaven, Willow House, Castlegate, etc. When you try to pursue additional social value, that does add extra time and complexity into the process. Something ironically scrutiny asked us not to do, and perhaps to be a bit more streamlined in the way we dispose of assets, while at the same time looking at these. So the reassurance is that when we set up the Older Persons Accommodation Project, the social value of those sites was assessed then. And it was that process of, and to be fair, completely transforming older persons accommodation in this city from what was quite a tired, poor, low quality stock with a lot of communal bathrooms, etc. We've absolutely, through that period, transformed that accommodation and transformed the experience of people in this city. That was the social value that was set against the use of these assets, and these assets were what were released to allow us to do that one. So I think the social value has always been there. You can't then try and reassess that process now and try, once you've taken the social value from the initial process, try to then reallocate that funding. I think as Tracy alluded to, if we were to delay now, there is significant risk, as I said, around about 7 figures into that one. If we lose income, that in itself will have a negative impact on the social value we can deliver. If we have to borrow to fill the gap because we haven't realised what we're going to get from assets, that takes away money from frontline adult social care. It takes away money from frontline social care, stops us being able to do those important things that we need to do on the front line. And as we'll see later on with the capital strategy, increased borrowing will put us significant pressure on our capital programme. We are near the limits with things like bringing forward York Central, bringing forward some of the major infrastructure projects. To that point, to not realise assets and take on significantly higher borrowing would really hinder the ability of the council to deliver this kind of social benefits that we need to do.
Thank you very much for that. So that then takes us to the recommendations that are on agenda item 9. And could I please see all those in favour of that? Thank you very much. So that's a clear majority in favour of the recommendations there for agenda item 9. That then moves us on to agenda item 10, which is the council's relationship with Welcome to Yorkshire. And I can see that Simon has joined us. So if I could hand over to you, please, Simon.
Thank you very much, Councillor Aston. We've heard many times already this evening about the importance of visitors to York, whether that's in terms of our thinking about the impacts of COVID and our recovery, whether that's thinking about what we've done to the city centre to make it more welcoming, whether it's in terms of visitors coming through the station frontage, or indeed how the city centre economy supports our commercial property portfolio. So I won't labour the point around the importance of tourism to York, but I think we would all recognise it's there. The growth in recent years of the tourism sector has been underpinned by our work, by the work of our colleagues at Make It York, and also by the work that Welcome to Yorkshire have done to promote York and the County of Yorkshire as well. And we heard from James Mason, the Chief Executive of Welcome to Yorkshire at the start of this meeting, about some of the challenges that the tourism industry faces, and also about some of the challenges that Welcome to Yorkshire has faced as well. Their new approach set out just as he arrived at the start of 2020 is set out in Annex A on pages 263 to 282 of your report this evening, and it emphasises an approach based on collaboration and on local authorities and the national parks working together with Welcome to Yorkshire and the tourism industry to all promote Yorkshire together. In terms of the request for money, agreement had previously been sought from the West Yorkshire and North Yorkshire Business Rates Pool to support that turnaround that's set out in Annex A. And we, along with the other local authorities and national parks, have been asked to contribute a fair share of that funding, which for us is just over £55,000, which is linked to our population, to enable Welcome to Yorkshire to continue to trade through this year. The SLA at pages 283 to 286, Annex B, sets out what we ask for in return. It covers what we expect in terms of governance and reporting, whether that's in terms of regular contact with officers or whether that's coming along to scrutiny to set out what's been achieved. It talks about their input into some of our key activities, our tourism strategy that we'll be developing early in the new year, or providing data and insight to support the many decisions that you've had to make in terms of supporting tourism in York. And then it goes through some smart objectives in terms of PR and marketing activities that they will do, and then the evaluation that will be undergone to make sure that what's been asked for has been delivered. So I hope the paper speaks for itself. As I say, I hope you all recognise the importance of the tourism sector, and very happy to answer any questions that you have on the report.
Thank you very much for that. I'll first go to Councillor Smalley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Simon, for introducing the paper. There's no denying that the tourism industry plays a major role in the city's economy and our culture, contributing 765 million, and with 20% of employment in our city depending on the sustainability of this sector. I'd like to thank all those working in and supporting our city's tourism sector, as this year has clearly brought quite a few unprecedented challenges. In building back better and making sure the sector can recover and thrive, both locally and regionally once again, cooperation and partnership will be crucial. The industry requires unprecedented support and innovation to not only save jobs, but to look at how we can build back a more resilient despite the challenges of this year. The Council's recovery strategy is a crucial part of the city's long-term recovery programme. We have continued to work closely with businesses and organisations such as Make It York, Visit York and York Bid and their respective members to ensure that we are ready to safely welcome visitors once again. Throughout the development and delivery of York's own tourism marketing, Welcome to Yorkshire has supported the tourism and leisure sector as they continue to adapt and innovate. We were clear from the outset that in order for resources to be contributed to Welcome to Yorkshire, we would need to understand how the proposed investment would directly benefit York, its residents and businesses. I'd like to thank officers for providing the extensive analysis of that. The paper sets out the opportunities and benefits for a close working partnership between Make It York and Welcome to Yorkshire, which would see our city and the industry benefit from the experience, reach and brand that Welcome to Yorkshire has established. By agreeing the recommendations as set out in the report, we can make sure that we're doing all that's possible to support our local tourism industry through this difficult period and continue to work to develop and enact a comprehensive recovery plan which will see our local and regional businesses thrive once again. If just one small anecdote of quite what difficulty this sector's in, whilst we've been on this call this evening at Executive, I've had an email from a local B&B in my ward that is struggling and wants to know what support they can access. Just demonstrates quite how much difficulty the tourism sector's in. I would like to quickly draw members' attention to paragraph 34 of this paper that demonstrates how this support will be funded. To be clear, it will be funded from the estimated final surplus balance of the 2019-20 North and West Yorkshire Business Rates Pool. And I think it's quite clear there how instalments will be paid upon measures against the performance against the service level agreement that's an annex to this paper. We look forward to the transparent, collaborative and constructive working relationship with Welcome to Yorkshire as we continue to support our city's tourism industry through what has been an incredibly difficult year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. And just to check that there aren't any other questions or comments on this, if not, between pages 259 and 286, we have the recommendations. Could I see all those in favour of that, please? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of the recommendations for agenda item 10. That then moves us on to agenda item 11, which is the Wenlock Children's Home contract variation and extension. And I can see that Amanda has joined us, so I'll hand straight over to you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm mindful of time, so I'll keep this brief. You've got before you a report requesting approval for an extension to an existing contract. with Hexagon Care, who provide our children's home facilities at Wenlock Terrace, and delegation to myself in consultation with Director of Governance to make any necessary arrangements. As corporate parents, we clearly want the best for our children, and this proposal means that we can move 3 children who are currently living outside of York back into the city, and obviously be able to access local services and be supported by our own services. The report details the other options that we have considered, but does put forward a proposal to move the current Wenlock Terrace provision, which is 6 beds, to a 3-bed terrace, 3-bed provision, which means that we can support some of our more complex children in a smaller and more appropriate family environment. Sophie Wales is the Assistant Director responsible for this area, is also with me, and we are happy, obviously, to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Amanda and Sophie, and I'll open it up for any comments or questions. Councillor Orrell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Amanda and Sophie, for the report and for the work that you've done on the report, and thank you also for all the briefings you've given me in the last few weeks for this very complex and wide-ranging portfolio. As has been outlined, not only does this report facilitate attention to an important contract, additionally, it produces a cost saving. However, I think it's just important that this change will enable 3 young people to move back to York to receive the care that they need. I appreciate that with the national shortage of places, this is always possible, but whenever we can, this should be our aim. It is worth noting that the current demand pressures in children's care are not unique to York and are clearly exacerbated by the ongoing pandemic. I'd therefore support the recommended option 1, and extend the current contract, which will increase the availability of residential care for children with complex needs within York and overall support local care. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Orrell. And again, I'll just check if there are not any further questions or comments, but if not, the report is pages 287 to 294, and we have the recommendation in the paper. Could I see all those in favour of that recommendation? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of that recommendation. Thank you, Amanda and Sophie. That then takes us on to agenda item 12, which is the finance and performance monitor between pages 295 and 342. And I'll hand over to Debbie.
Thank you. So this is your second monitoring report of the year and outlines the latest forecast of the financial outturn and updates on the latest performance information. Report outlines that continued pressures being seen in relation to social care in particular and the ongoing pandemic. The report was written just as we entered into this current national lockdown period, so it doesn't yet contain any of the potential financial implications of recent weeks, and given the spending review was clearly just announced this week, it also doesn't include any of the additional funding announcements or changes that were announced then. I would also just add that whilst we are still forecasting an overspend for the current financial year, work is ongoing to ensure that excuse me, costs are controlled, particularly again across adult social care, and work is ongoing to identify efficiencies across all services. But it's fair to say there remains a significant financial challenge ahead.
Thank you very much for that. So I'll open it for questions and comments. Only thing I would firstly say is with a mind on the upcoming budget consultation. I think this report shows us the scale of the challenge ahead in setting the 21-22 council budget, not just here in York, but for every council across the country. And the report quite clearly states the huge financial pressures on the council generated by the pandemic. And obviously you can see part of that breakdown under part 3.3 rather of the report. Many people will have heard the Chancellor's spending review announcement that Debbie just referred to yesterday, in which the economic crisis we're facing was clear to see. The increase in spending power is welcome, but actually, despite the Chancellor's warm words, this funding will predominantly come from any council tax increases that councils make, and the social care precept. Therefore, once again, the risk sits on local government. There was no early Christmas gift from the government in that spending review. Earlier in the year, as part of our submission to the Chancellor's spending review, we urged the government to back York and provide the funding needed to enable us to lead recovery in York and across the region. And as I mentioned earlier, despite the disappointment of yesterday's announcement and indeed the tier today, we will continue to make these calls and seek the investment that our city needs. And on that, I'll bring in Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to be brief. I may be even more brief than I usually am, as Councillor Waller, Councillor Orwell and yourself have mentioned a lot of the things that I was going to highlight in this particular report. I think we can't move away from the impact of COVID. As you said, on the table on paragraph 3, we're looking at £18 million anticipated additional costs in this year alone. Some of that has been met by central government, but not all of it, and that responsibility falls on us as we try to balance the books in already difficult times with rising social care need and rising children's social care need, even without the COVID impact. This report does highlight probably around £12 million of risks going into the next financial year as a result of COVID. We did watch the spending review with interest yesterday, and there is some level of mitigation in there, a little bit around one-off adult social care grants, a little bit of leeway around collection shortfalls. But the reality is this is only for 1 year, and we will continue to take significantly more risk. It was welcome the government did acknowledge the important roles of local authorities and how vital we've been to the COVID response. But as you say, that didn't come with the additional financial support that we need to deliver what we need to for our residents. As you said, that additional funding has been referenced primarily as spending power. And I think, as we all know, spending power means no money, find it yourself. That transfers all of the risk, not just to the local authority, but to local taxpayers. And I think we all know council tax is one of the most regressive forms of taxation and not the best way to plug some of the gaps in the financial situation we find ourselves as a country. I wanted to highlight, as Councillor Waller alluded to earlier, on paragraph 5, the grant funding that we've had for businesses. I think we were one of the fastest local authorities in getting those grants out the first time around with the initial lockdown, and we're already on track with delivering money to those businesses now as part of that particular lockdown grant. As we know, and as we lobbied hard, and Councillor Waller himself did as well, to get to those businesses that didn't receive support from those grants, and we did get through this, the additional revenue support grants that we've got. We are one of the few local authorities in the region that actually have the ARG scheme up and running and open for people to apply to, and we will soon be putting money out to those businesses who missed out on the lockdown grants. And I think that's something that's been both stark to Councillor Waller and myself, is that we've been contacted quite frequently by residents from nearby authorities who are not able to access that funding yet, who do have a trade in York and are coming to us as we're one of the few authorities that actually have been able to get that one out. And as Councillor Waller alluded to in paragraph 7, we did step in and make sure free school meals were available when the government failed to act on that particular proviso. We didn't wait. We made sure that that funding was there, and we lobbied hard again to make sure that the government stepped in on that one. And it was welcome that they did eventually do that. And as that shows, we now have around about £416,000 of funding, which will help us to meet that free school meal commitment running through until the end of this school year. But also we'll be able to, a future decision session in the next few weeks, bring forward a scheme about how we can make sure that other residents not affected by free school meals will have access to that level of support. I think, as my stuck record, as I will always say, we still have no solution to the social care crisis. This particular report shows again the pressure that we face as a local authority. The can continues to be kicked down the road with the green paper in terms of how we do this. Again, we have another sticking plaster of a 1-year social care grant and no long-term plan for that. So I think we need to continue to lobby hard to make sure that we have the funding that enables us to deliver what we need to for our residents. With that, happy to support the recommendations, which are much shorter on page 297, paragraph 3.
Thank you very much for that. I can't see any other questions or comments, so if we could move straight to those recommendations as suggested, could I see those in support of those? Thank you very much. So clear majority in support of the recommendations on agenda item 12. That then takes us through to agenda item 13, Capital Programme Monitor 2. Debbie.
Thank you. Again, this is your second monitoring report of the year for the capital programme. It outlines progress made so far in aspects of delivery of some schemes. The report does request some reprofiling of other schemes, and just to point out that it does need updating. It clearly doesn't include some of the decisions you've just made on the previous asset management strategy report, so they will be reflected in the next Monitor 3 in February.
Thank you very much. And then open it for questions or comments. Councillor Eyre.
Sorry, Chair, I forgot to mute again, so you may not see me unmuting. Yeah, I think to reflect on something, as I say, we don't look at £144 million capital programme to be delivered this year. There's some significant achievements. There is a reprofiling of around about £40 million, which is primarily the complexity of schemes such as York Central and the Guildhall and the station frontage, as we referenced to earlier. I wanted to pick out a few of the highlights from that £144 million. So we are seeing £2.4 million worth of school improvements being delivered at Dringhouse Primary, Ralph Butterfield Primary and Westfield Primary Schools. Councillor Orwell have noted today that we're opening the Centre of Excellence at the Beehive, one of the first facilities of its kind in the country. So we'll be able to deliver short overnight breaks for children with complex disabilities, being delivered in partnership with the NHS England. Again, shows the way we're working to get the maximum we can for the city. As was kind of alluded to earlier, we're seeing significant progress on housing at Duncan Barracks and Burnholme. The Guildhall, we've been able to make significant progress despite the ills of having flooding thrown at us and then the COVID crisis. We've still managed to keep it within the capital budget that we have. There's no further ask for capital. And COVID permitting, we may be able to see council meetings resuming in 2021 as we come back to the chamber. And while I mentioned the relaxation slightly of COVID restrictions in Tier 2, I just wanted to put a specific mention into the community stadium with the news that fans will be allowed to visit the stadium as it comes out, and we'll be looking, hopefully in the next month or so, fans will be able to start to see their team playing at the new stadium, and to sneak in and possibly at this opportunity that we could and should hopefully have Super League fixtures for the crowds to watch in York coming forward in 2021, and urge everybody to get behind the hashtag Heartland expansion project that are being put forward by York City Knights. They really do deserve that. I think it's something we as a city really need to get behind. Thank you, Chair. Support the recommendations on page 34.
Thank you very much for that. And again, just to check if there aren't any other comments or questions. If not, we've got the recommendations as stated. Can I please see those in favour of them? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of the recommendations on agenda item 13. So that then takes us on to agenda item 14, Treasury Management Mid-Year Review. Debbie.
Yep, so it's a statutory requirement for you to consider this report on the Treasury Management mid-year update and the Prudential indicators. The report will also be scrutinised by Audit and Governance Committee at their meeting in January. Given the current economic climate, I think it's fair to say returns remain low on our investments, but the report also outlines the new borrowing that's been undertaken this year in line with our Treasury management strategy. Some reform to the Public Works Loan Board was announced again as part of the spending review announcements this week, which will see borrowing rates return to 2019 levels, but again the impact of this is still being assessed.
Thank you very much. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Just to commend the work that officers have done on one of the most important aspects of our portfolio and probably one of our least read reports, but one of the most significant in terms of the financial impact. I'm happy to support the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Again, just to check that there aren't any further comments or questions. If not, we've got the recommendations between pages 361 and 374. Can I please see those in favour? Thank you very much for that. So that's a clear majority in favour of the recommendations. Councillor Wooderson, I'll go back to you. We can't change the decision.
Oh no, I'm absolutely delighted with the decision. I just want it recognised that the amount of work that our Treasury guys have done, and they've put a fourth pillar in so that we actually now judge all of our investments against the FTSE for good, ensuring that we are not only getting the great returns, but we're also doing it the right way.
Thank you very much. So further endorsement of the decision that we've just made. So thank you very much. That then takes us on to agenda item 15, urgent business. You'll be pleased to know that I've not been informed of any business to be taken under urgent business. So just to thank all those that took part, from the public participants to those watching, to those on the call, much appreciated, and we'll see you again, I'm sure, for the December executive. Thanks all. Bye-bye.